Hello and welcome to Media 7. Tonight we meet the cream of this year's crop of journalism graduates, the people who will report the future. But first, New Zealand faces generational challenges. The globe is heating. Economists are lining up to play Cassandra on Morning Report. But what may be the year's defining political story has unfolded on a much more human level. The furore over MPs' perks and expenses, most of them in place for years, has shaken the Prime Minister's relaxed public image in a way that the great questions of government have not. Why is it a story? Is hypocrisy the worst political sin? And what happens now that the cracks have opened? To take us there, Jose Barbosa goes a perk bustin'.
There's an old saying I've just made up, which goes, don't play with the public purse lest the public vote for someone else. It's a warning that doesn't seem to have been heeded at all by our elected representatives, as numerous examples of MPs caught with their snouts in the taxpayer trough have been covered by the nation's news media this year. The ritualistic flaying by news started in the home country, Britain, when the Daily Telegraph published leaked details of MPs' expense records.
One MP claimed taxpayer funds for cleaning his moat, others for mortgages that were already paid off.
The almost daily revelations angered the Poms and led to a constant stream of resignations, including then Home Secretary Jackie Smith, who, it was revealed, had designated a house in London owned by her sister as a main residence to claim a parliamentary allowance. Gone was her job, but at the very least she did find some new fans on YouTube.
Actually, I think Jackie is very f***able. Love a big sexy ass.
It was a fate avoided by our finance minister after it was reported he'd been drawing a ministerial living allowance to live in his own Wellington home.
I paid back the money because it wasn't a good look and nothing's changed.
Well, I'll put it to you that nothing's changed and it's still not a good look.
Well, look, I'm treated the same way as every other MP.
By then, enough body fluids had been emptied by terrified MPs to excite the journalists, which, like the Amazonian kangaroo, entered Parliament's urethra, causing a news hemorrhage. Suddenly, every MP's travel expenses were being poured over by reporters. Labour's Chris Carter had his overseas trips with partner in tow questioned with a good old-fashioned stakeout.
When we called this morning, he was just a blur of Jersey.
And there wasn't a dream catcher big enough to stop questions around two Green MPs who claimed over $1,000 a week on a house owned by the party's superannuation scheme. However, the best was yet to come. News editors around the country had a simultaneous joygasm when it was revealed that Rodney Hyde took his girlfriend on a taxpayer-funded trip, which wasn't nearly as painful as enduring Simon Dallow's dope rhymes.
Top politician in the gun for what he's said and done.
On close-up, Mike Hosking could hardly contain himself.
Well, it's a turn up for the books, this one, isn't it?
So excited was old Tired Eyes that he went temporarily insane and kept on stating the obvious.
The taxpayer, that's you and me.
I want to apologise to my colleagues and to all the ACT Party supporters that have supported me over the years. But most importantly, I want to apologise to the people of Epsom. Made mistakes and I've exercised poor judgment. For that, I'm sorry.
But the story that really had news legs was Māori MP Hone Harawira's jaunt to Paris with his wife during a conference in Brussels. Jessica Much signalled her disgust by using her disapproving face. And Campbell Live tried to inject some drama into an interview with Ngāpuhi elders by using the same cutaway of Te Whai Harawira twice. Then Harawira himself kept the story alive with a cuss word-filled email enraging pensioners when it was read out on Radio New Zealand.
Do you believe that white man BS too, do you? White MFers have been raping our lands and ripping us off for centuries, and all of a sudden you want me to play along with their puritanical BS.
It's unlikely the press will ever tire of stories involving MPs and the public cookie jar. But are journalists only covering these indiscretions because they know it will raise the public ire and ratings? Are these stories really as important as the media want us to think they are? And while they're chasing free-spending MPs, are they missing more pertinent issues?
Coming up, New Zealand's oldest cat. Can you believe it lives in a rest home?
Joining me now are commentator and founder of what he modestly describes as New Zealand's most successful corporate and public affairs consultancy, Matthew Hooton.
Hello.
Founder of pundit.co.nz and producer of Q&A, Tim Watkin. And News Talk ZB's veteran political editor, Barry Soper. Welcome to you all, gentlemen.
Good evening. Thank you.
Matthew, let's start with Rodney Hyde's apology. Marks out of 10?
Oh, 10 out of 10. He
looked suitably contrite?
Look, if it was insincere, 10 out of 10 for acting, and if he was genuinely as contrite as that, 10 out of 10 for being contrite. He didn't do anything wrong, as he spent a number of days telling us. He followed the rules. These entitlements are available to him. All MPs use them. His charge is hypocrisy because he's been a Perk
Which,
buster.
I mean, is that the worst political sin? Because that certainly seems to be at the heart of the reaction there.
Yeah, and if it had been anyone else, I doubt that it would have got the coverage. Also, I think there's a degree of... look, his girlfriend is half his age plus 7, so he sort of hit the jackpot like that. And I think there's an element of that. If this had been his long-standing wife or long-standing partner, I don't think we'd have had the same media coverage of it.
No, and I think every single story used the word girlfriend, didn't it?
That's right.
Did that have an impact on the way it was
Yeah, I
seen?
think that made it sound worse than it would have if the media had used the word partner. Yeah.
There was still, I think, a degree of political calculation in when and how he chose to make that apology, though, wasn't there? Sunday afternoon, so you know you're going to get the 6 o'clock news and the Monday morning papers. That's just basic political management,
These people
isn't
are
it?
politicians to the tips of their fingertips. You can be sincere and cynical at the same time. You can feel genuinely... remorseful about what you've done, and you think, well, seeing I've got to do this, I'll do it on Sunday afternoon.
So let's spin it right, yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. You wouldn't expect anything else from a politician like Rodney Hyde.
Then, of course, we had the other apology, which was quite a different affair. Harawira, perhaps we can have a look at that.
There's been considerable media speculation about a recent email from me, so I thought it best to clarify a few things. Firstly, I readily apologise for the poor choice of words in that email. I suspected if I'd said something like, European colonisers have been responsible for the loss of more than 63 million acres of Māori land over the past 150 years, then it is inappropriate that you should be holding me to standards set by people with such little regard for Māori land and Māori custom. It wouldn't have rated a mention at all in the media.
Well, Tim, I thought he did quite well on spinning that one too. No mention of the original offence.
No, he was very much apologising for the follow-up sin rather than initial sin. I mean, hypocrisy is the great political sin, and there's a reason for that. It goes to judgment, it goes to the public trust, and that matters in a democracy. With Harawira, it's not hypocrisy, interestingly. It's almost the opposite in a way from Hyde. It is a question of substance, but he's been utterly consistent, and his judgment has been that he doesn't have to play by other people's rules. And he plays by his own rules.
And yet that obviously was not acceptable to Buddy Makaire, who really kicked this story off by sending their email correspondence to Radio New Zealand.
Well, that's right. So, after he'd been challenged by Hone, and so there was a certain amount of bravado involved in that, I guess, too. But it's about judgment, and in Hone's case, he chose to take the trip that he did while he was, in Europe, thanks to the taxpayer, and then he made a choice to get angry about it. Now, the question of that is that he then turned it into a race story, and that's, I think, disappointing for, because it's too easy politically to do that. But it's interesting to look at the apology specifically. He apologised to the Maori Party, he apologised for his choice of words, but that was it. And in that case, you give him points perhaps for sincerity. He didn't try to apologise for something he didn't believe in.
He made an excellent point that if he had written a 10,000-word thesis, he would have been awarded a PhD, and everyone would have thought it was fine. I mean, it was only the style of language.
I mean, that surely stands to reason, that if he put it in a more reasonable way. But I thought, again, there was a degree of media management at play there. He spent the whole day that he made that apology in the company of friendly souls, Radio Wātea, and then Willie and JT on Radio Live.
That's right.
He was interviewed by his mates.
That's right. And you don't do these things in a way that you're going to get caught out, although, funnily enough, he did catch himself out by then exploding the story by then taking a swing at Labour. So, yeah, the thing is with Harawira, he is what he is. With Rodney, there's a question that he was actually defending himself right up till the day he wasn't defending himself, which does make you wonder about the quality of that apology. With Harawira, the apology was targeted and therefore perhaps more sincere, but he was perhaps apologising for the wrong thing.
Barry, how's this playing in Wellington?
Oh, well, it's been playing a lot in Wellington, obviously, but I think you've got to remember that Hone Harawira made public himself the fact that he had taken a day off.
Yeah, no sleeping by the gallery.
No, there was none. No, it was a public. In fact, it was a newspaper column that he'd written, and that's how it was made public. So certainly he felt that he was entitled to do that, and of course he wasn't. He should have tacked any trip he wanted to do on at the end of it. But again, in both these cases, they played by the book. It's just that maybe that book should be reread, and that's the problem. That in Wellington, it started this year, the transparency, the opening of the books in terms of what MPs are claiming in expenses. And this has been going on, of course, for many, many years. And there's 90% travel perk, which is what he used to take Louise Crome, you'd have to say, to a family wedding in London. To me, as an apology, I disagree with Matthew, which is hardly surprising, but I think he oozed insincerity when he made it. Rodney Hyde's a great actor, and this man was a perk buster. He was a self-proclaimed perk buster, came there. Well, he's used the perks extraordinarily well in his own favour, and now he's been found out, so he's been busted.
Well, you have to say, even if he wasn't sincere, he got down on his knees with that apology, didn't he? We haven't seen that before from MPs caught with their fingers in the till. Has it become easier to nail?
His fingers were not in the till, and this is the underlying issue is the rules, and the fact that MPs believe, and the Speaker this week has made this point very strongly, that MPs feel that they gave up a pay rise, I think, sometime in the 1990s or even more recently, in exchange for this 90% perk.
That's an excuse they use. I don't think
and what they're saying is that more recent MPs don't get that perk, so the ones who have been in Parliament longer are entitled to use it. And, you know, the context has changed. Helen Clark used that perk every single year for her and her husband to go skiing in Norway.
So why wasn't it reported then? Why wasn't it the story?
Well, it was reported. We all knew that that's what Helen Clark was doing.
But why is it a story now and not then?
Apparently it's hypocrisy, because Hyde has made a career out of saying that these things were wrong, and he's a party of small government. I mean, I tend to agree with Barry in that the apology certainly looked contrite, but in between the trip that he took with the first trip to Hawaii and the second trip to Europe, he was on television saying, yes, Roger Douglas, when he did the same thing, it's unhelpful, it's not a good look for our party. And he was in the process of doing it both before and after himself.
And so I can tell you
he had plenty of chances to figure this out mentally and decide that it was not a good thing to do and stop doing it. He did it anyway.
Well, and in fact, he had to be persuaded to do it, because he would not have made that apology, in my view, unless his advisors leaned very heavily on him and told him to apologise. And in fact, those very same advisors told him not to take his partner to Europe when he did. So he defied his advisors, and now turns around and makes what to me was a totally insincere apology. He knows that he's got a lot of work to do to re-establish any credibility that he had with the public, and particularly the voters in Epsom, because they're not going to be happy about what they've seen this man who has held himself up to be holier than thou. Well, in fact, he's one of the biggest sinners in the place.
I don't think it's going to affect his chances of winning Epsom at all. I think that he's got a hold on the seat for as long as he wants in that particular seat here.
Yeah. Has it become easier to pursue these stories, though? Because we talked to, our researcher talked to Duncan Garner, who said that when he did the John Tamahiri Golden Handshake story, thereafter John Tamahiri blanked him. would not give him any stories. Has that changed now? Because now everyone's copying it.
Well, yeah, simply because the Greens started this. They wanted transparency, and in fact they were found out that they had their hands in the till as well. But it was the Greens that started it. Now we've got a totally transparent system. So every 3 months you're going to get a rerun of this. You're going to go through MPs' expenses and say, well, they shouldn't have taken that trip. What did they do that for?
In fairness to the politicians, all of them, I don't think the Prime Minister and the Speaker are making life very easy for them, because what's happening is the rules aren't being changed. No. MPs are still entitled to this 90% travel perk. They're still being told it's part of their remuneration. And then they're sort of being told, oh, but you shouldn't really do it. Well, you know, either Parliament needs to reform these rules.
They're reviewing them at the moment.
Or the rule has to be that if you follow the rules, it's okay. And yet,
And you've got to think that Lockwood Smith is going to be a little bit torn asunder by this. I mean, he made this transparent. The reason why we're getting these stories now is because the Speaker for the first time said, here, Official Information Act, we're going to make it all public, it can go out there.
No, it's an interesting one, that, because
sorry, not all
the
of
money
it.
that
right,
Rodney Hyde says that he's paid back, $22,000 in the last couple of weeks. Well, in fact, we'll never know, actually, whether he has paid that back, because it goes into parliamentary services, and parliamentary services is not subject to the Official Information Act.
I think the consequences of not paying it back are greater than
the
value of $22,000.
Well, no, I agree, but what I'm saying is there's still a large amount of secrecy when it comes to what MPs spend and how they spend.
Including the ones that aren't there. I mean, quite frankly, if we're talking about the Prime Minister of New Zealand needing a summer holiday, wants to go to Norway, wants to get out of the country so they're not recognised, it's part of their remuneration, they've been in Parliament for many years, it seems fair enough.
Yeah.
The problem is that it's all these MPs who have retired, who may never have been very successful themselves. I mean, Judy Keel is entitled. She did 4 terms in Parliament. She's entitled to the 90% subsidy for the rest of her life. Well,
she's also,
we don't hear about whether she's using it. Maybe she's not.
No, but she is retired, and that seems to be one of the points that perhaps should come up in this review, is that we have now younger MPs coming in at a younger age. They have much longer post the House to spend this money. Usually, in the past, it was older MPs. They had 10 or 20 years left after they retired, and here, thank you for your long service.
But they don't
don't
get the same entitlement now. It's only the MPs that came in before 1999.
But I think part of that question should be, perhaps one rule you could put in was you don't get to use this 90% perk or the smaller perks now until you've left the House.
Or unless you're on Parliament or something to do with a public office.
Yes.
I mean, we're getting into the Speaker's policy here. I wonder whether some of the stories are starting to get a bit silly. The Don Post this week had potting Judith Collins for spending $800 to take her husband to a conference in Australia for state ministers where spouses had been invited. I frankly don't see a problem with that.
Again, I think that, one of the problems here, the Prime Minister's at fault here. The Prime Minister announced that he would be paying for his wife to travel overseas with him, and that was because of the recession, and you understand the politics in that. But, the Prime Minister's spouse is required, and ministers' spouses are required to attend some functions internationally, and the taxpayer should pay for that. It is ridiculous, in my view, for John Key to personally be paying for his wife, say, to attend a banquet at the Oval Office or in Europe.
And it's easy, with respect to John Key, of course, it's easy for him to take the moral high road, given that he has got quite a lot of money in the bank and there's no hardship to him. But
on the other hand, Harawira is not a poor man either. I was amazed that he was able to get away with that. I'm just a poor brown guy who might never get a chance to go. He's in the top 2% of income earners.
Exactly.
He has business interests in Northland. He's not poor. He could go to Paris if he wanted to.
The difference between the two cases, the Hyde and the Harawira case, is that Rodney Hyde followed the rules, but in a way which was inconsistent with his brand. Harawira broke the rules, especially with the day in Paris, in a way which was consistent with his brand.
That's right.
And really, yet politically, I think this is going to do more damage to Rodney Hyde than to Harawira in the long run for that very reason. Yet one broke the rules.
It's interesting. Do you think? I mean, there's a certain point that with Harawira there is a racial element. To be frank, that brown people taking from the public purse perhaps is worse than white people taking from the public purse. I wonder whether...
I think the opposite is true. I think in this case, I think people have cut him a lot of slack. Yeah. When that story first came out about the day in Paris, I heard people in the Auckland business community joking that what this really was, and they were joking, was a sophisticated protest against the Common Agriculture Policy by snubbing the EU, and it's something that Tim Grosser, the Trade Minister, would love to do. People, I think, were cutting him a lot of slack because people like him, and I think, if anything, if there is a racial element in this, and I don't really think there is, it's worked in his favour.
Well, the email was highly inflammatory, and in fact, if I'd gone out and written the same material in an email, I would have been dragged before the Race Relations Conciliator before you could say Winston Peters likes Somalian taxi drivers.
And we're going to take a break now.
We need to talk about him.
We're going to take a break now, and we'll talk about reputations and rehabilitation when we come back, and we'll look at a few public purse scandals you may have forgotten.